Um, so today's session will be recorded and uploaded to our website in the near future. Feel free to add any questions that you have to the chat. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. Today's session, with great power comes great responsibility. Using AI ethically in your research is part of our Spring Academic Integrity Week. As I mentioned, my name is Jacques Zalma, so I'll serve as the host for today's session. And today's session is really going to provide an introduction to the ethical considerations surrounding the use of generated AI in research. It is a topic that is timely and necessary, and I'm extremely excited for it. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Michaela and Clarissa and let them get us started.
Thank you. I actually don't think I have a much better introduction than I was already provided. I'm pretty excited about the title, With Great Power Comes Great Responsibility. My name is Clarissa Moreno. I'm joined here by Michaela. I think if we are ready to go, I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, so as we know, we're probably all very tired about hearing about AI. It's everywhere, but fortunately, I guess, it isn't not going anyway anytime soon. Make sure you see my slides. Perfect. There are a few things to keep in mind when it comes to AI. Oh, no. But, oh, that's why. We do have a question to start off with today. So have you considered using AI, or have you used AI in your research at all? You can join that via that QR code or slido.com, but here's a direct link. Hopefully this works okay. I did notice a couple of glitches before we got started, but let's hope it goes in. We're just curious to hear from you how you have been interested in it, or have you heard about it being used, any of those sorts. And if you feel comfortable, please feel free to unmute or type in the chat. If you feel more comfortable, send it directly to myself or Michaela, and we will go ahead and get those answered questions as well. Okay, so I can see you're all typing, so that's good. That's working. So we've considered or used it as brainstorming ideas. That is great. Yeah, that's actually one of the great ways that we have seen it being used lately as well. So I have a couple more people typing in here. Just wait another minute or so before we move on. Heard of it being used to improve transitions in writing. That's really interesting. I'd be interested in hearing that. That's actually one way I haven't used, heard of it being used. For citations, that's a slippery slope. So that's definitely something we will talk about today, for sure. So I think explore AI literature mapping tools. That's interesting. Those are some great ways. I actually haven't heard of a couple of these, and I'm pretty interested in seeing how those are used. But some of the things that we will talk about today are going to touch on some of the things that you all mentioned, talking about the transparency of it, bias, privacy, how to hold yourself accountable, proper attribution, the citations, and finally we'll end with some library resources we have available for you all today. So there are a few things to keep in mind when it comes to AI, particularly large language models, which is what comes to mind when we think of AI, ChatGPT or Bard, which I think is now Gemini. These large language models, they tend to hallucinate information. So sometimes when it comes to the citations or publications, it can provide false information, bringing up a very credible title of an article or journal, etc., with a not so real DOI. This also happens with the biographical information. I know I've typed in my information to see what comes up, and it tells me that I graduated from UCLA, that I'm from San Bernardino. I've been at USC for like 12 years when I've only been here for 2. So it can be very fictitious and exaggerate a lot of information. The other thing to note is that there are a lot of limitations, specifically noting that it is not connected to the internet. As of right now, at least, most of our free tools are not connected to the internet. So that means that we are not pulling real-time information. Some of these will state that their information is from a certain period of time, such as ChatGPT, which I will be mentioning a lot because that is the most popular tool right now, whose information is from 2021. And finally, the university does not have a university-wide policy regarding AI in scholarship. So it is always important to refer back to your syllabus, your school, your instructor, excuse me. And you'll hear me say this a lot throughout the presentation, is that I'm not endorsing the use of AI. I am just mentioning some things that we have seen and some ways that you can use or can use it ethically at least. But if you use it, remember, it is a supplemental tool to the work you have already done. It is not a crutch to rely on to do the work for you. The first thing is transparency. What this will mean is just to disclose your use. USC says that the academic integrity means being honest and forthright about your academic endeavors. All this means is please be honest about your use of AI, if any at all. Again, not endorsing, but if you use it, be honest. You should always be able to provide enough details to replicate or at least have enough detail to have your instructors understand the process that you went through. This can mean anything from adding an appendix or adding a supplemental page with any information that includes the tool that you used, any questions you asked, or even possible, what would be better is providing a screenshot of those questions so we know the outcome and what you received or what information you received and how you used it. An example of this could be, for this particular workshop today, we did use ChatGPT to create the description of this workshop. When Michaela and I were discussing, how do we describe it? How do we tell the audience what we want to get across? I just went to ChatGPT. We're talking about, let's just go to ChatGPT and figure out what's going on. And so this is what it pulled up for us. So you can see if you compare this description to the one that we provided, there is some information that was changed a little bit. And that's so that we can reflect our own voices, we can reflect our own ideas, and even the outcomes, which I didn't show the screenshot of the outcomes, but we did edit it so that way we could provide the information we felt was most relevant, not what the AI assumes we want to get across. Another thing that happens quite often with AI is bias. Many AI tools, they do provide that disclaimer, they mention bias, but there's no real way to mitigate it, at least as of yet, nor any way to identify how these bias are coming across. We have seen many of these tools have a tendency towards the Western perspective and really amplify societal stereotypes. This is more seen, more noticeable in any images. The following example that are seen here were used created by Midjourney. So the prompt was a group of nurses and a group of managers. Looking at these photos, they look pretty realistic, right? But do you notice anything about these images when it comes to the group of nurses or just the group of managers? Anything stick out to you, or trying to think of other ways to phrase it. Right, so we have these group of nurses. It looks very, I guess I would say more 1950s. So we have just all white females, nurses. This is not something we see today at all anywhere. We will probably somewhere. But we do have a more diverse group that we see working as nurses now, not always females, not always white. And also with a group of managers, most of these, we can see a couple of females in there, but all of these are, again, white males in suits, which we know is not always the case. If we look at the dean of libraries, she's a woman, right? We have the president of the university, she is a woman. So it's not always just men in these roles. Another funny example that I always like to think of is I typed in librarian one time. I don't have an image, but it was a white librarian with a bun in her hair with a cardigan on. So it was the typical stereotype that we always picture, have seen in movies for decades. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, especially if you're planning on using any images in your research and any of your work at all, is that there may not be a whole lot of diversity or inclusion in them. The same goes with privacy. We're not entirely sure what's going on there. Just like with anything on the internet, it's always best not to disclose any personal information. Like you're not going to be posting a picture of your credit card, or you're not going to be providing the Prince of Narnia with a few dollars to get back home because this email said that they needed some help, right? So we're always mindful of the personal information that we're providing. And that's really important to keep in mind because, again, we're not entirely sure how these AI tools are using this information. We do know that a lot of them are, especially the large language models, are learning from how we interact with them, what we're seeing. But we don't really know if, when it comes to personal information, are they using it to improve their models or are they redacting that information? Um, Particularly when it comes to, like your social security number as well. You don't want that out there, but that can also come with my area, like social work. I make sure to tell the students when you're assessing a patient, you're not going to want to put in all of their name, their city, their age, their race, and all that. That's way too much information for anywhere on the internet to have, but especially something that we don't know how it's going to be used or reflected in the future. That's where you need to hold yourself accountable. Because with any research, whether it's academic or it's after reading something your aunt posted, like on Facebook, we need to verify that information before we actually put it into place, before we take it for fact. We are always responsible for our own work, and we need to make sure it's something that we're proud of. And we need to understand the potential it may have, whether it's positive or it's negative. Um, so when we use those tools, if we use those tools, we need to understand that these implications may affect us badly, especially if we're not having, that proper attribution. We talked about how there are some things that we are not really sure of, how these models are affected with the information we put in. We can get like an inkling of information by looking on the about section of these tools or their websites, just like we would go to their about section of any other website to learn more about them. This can really help us provide us on any possible limitations of those tools. Occasionally, it'll have information on how the models are trained and what that purpose of that tool is. So again, not endorsing it, but if you're using it, it's really important that these tools meet your needs. Like Grammarly, many of us have been using Grammarly for quite a while, probably. And this is a form of AI. I know many of us don't really think of it as AI, but it has always been checking our grammar, been checking our spelling, our sentence structure. But now it has this new AI feature where it's can help you identify gaps in your own writing, can give you ideas on all around improvements, like shortening your sentences or even adjusting like the tone of how you're writing. Like obviously we would not be turning to Grammarly to produce an AI photo or to develop slideshows. Granted, like these are really super simple examples, but we kind of get the gist there. Like we use the context of tools to determine if it's our fit of our needs. And we do this every single day with all types of tools, not just AI. So it's just a matter of using what we already know and just using it in a different context. Okay, so we had talked about the impact, right? So especially if we're not using that attribution. Oh, here we go. I forgot about this. So we do have here, this is ChatGPT's about information. So we can find on their website what this tool is actually designed for. So a quick description of it, and also just a rundown of how its model is trained. So it's quite a lot, but at least it's letting you know that, you put in your prompt and we understand the behavior, and now we're fine tuning it based on what your behaviors. And it's based on, millions of people using it. But you can find this on a lot of different ones, like Gemini's main website. You can find their about information as well. So that attribution, that's what we're talking about. So attribution, or giving somebody the proper credit where credit is due. This is going to be just like any part of your research. And a part of academic integrity is really knowing that when you're quoting or when you're paraphrasing, incorporating images, text, etc., into your work, it's necessary to provide that attribution or provide that citation. And this is always the case when something is not an original idea of yours. So if you use even just a little snippet of another information, we really want to provide that attribution. And the same goes for AI, because when you use these ideas or these images that are not your own, it really goes against these principles of academic integrity, and not just during this academic integrity week, but all the time. So this is something that we want to be able to take a look at when not just when we're using AI, but all the time. But when we're wanting to replicate, we want our instructors or someone to be able to replicate or understand that process of how we use that specific tool. We want to be able to provide that attribution to that tool. The libraries have put together a research guide. This is just like a web page basically with resources and guidance on AI that also includes the proper citation. This next slide has a couple of examples of the most popular ones, MLA, APA in Chicago. But you can also find these on that research guide, which I will pass along to Michaela to give you a little bit more information on those library resources.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. And also I put the link in the chat so that everybody can save that link. And if you want to go, I think, yeah, exactly on this. So here we are. So yeah, this is a very, well, it's always growing since so much about AI changes, but we have at least put together the basic information about what we know about the tools that are being used in generative AI in research the most. We have provided, you can see, citing generative AI information. So some, like ChatGPT, some models actually give you a preferred citation information, some don't. So we have put together a lot of information on how you would go about citing different tools. And then also we have a section here on using generative AI in scholarship and research, which includes limitations and warnings and ethical considerations. And then also some key takeaways. And this guide also has resources for faculty. And we also added a box recently, resources for librarians. So there is, there's like constant new articles and publications on generative AI coming out. So we try to keep it up to date. We're doing this also by adding dates of when we last updated so that everybody can be aware of how updated or outdated the information on the guide is. But I hope that this it's going to be helpful. And then on the next slide, we also have this. Thank you. So this one is also on the research guide, and this is also going to come out in printing and there's PDF versions soon. This is just like a quick bookmark infographic about using generative AI in your research, some of the ethical uses, but then checking with your professor, as Clarissa mentioned, being mindful of the wrong information, being mindful of fictitious information and of biases, citing your sources, staying informed, and then the link to the live guide again. So again, this research guide will grow, but it has, I think, very useful information for everybody who's using or considering to use AI in their research. Thank you, Clarissa.
Oh, thank you. And I think we do have one more question on here. Oh, conclusions. So what AI tools, what can they be good for? Right, that's one thing that we all really want to know. Generating search terms, I do have to admit I have used this when I get stuck, but like I've already feel like I've exhausted all the search terms I could possibly come across. Then it's sort of helpful to type in like, hey, ChatGPT, what are some search terms I can use to search my library for topic XYZ? And it can just help you expand upon what you already have come across. But sometimes you'll even see like you are on the right track, and it's really reassuring to know that you are on the right track, especially when you think you're stuck. Summarization and simplification. There are some tools out there that can help you read an article, right? But when you use it to highlight your concepts, what it does, again, it's not you, it can't think like you, it is its own, intelligence. So it's highlighting what it thinks it's important. So it's not going to do the same exact job as you would if you were reading it and highlighting through it to find what's important, but it can serve as a guide to help you see, what different sections of that article could be, as well as understand some of those difficult to understand sentences. Sometimes we come across those very jargony sentences, and typing it into understand what it means more fully is a lot easier than what I have done, where is I'll highlight a word, look up the synonym, look up the definition. So sometimes it can help you really simplify those sentences. And again, just as I mentioned, it will it may miss those important points. And feedback. We mentioned Grammarly earlier, which can help you look for improvements. This is actually something I have done as well. So I have actually compared, my writing with the feedback that it's given me, just to see where my mistakes are, to find out what patterns are I have in my own writing. Like one thing I noticed is that by comparing the two is I use commas like crazy, where commas are not necessary. So it can really help you understand just those little tiny details that you might miss that you didn't notice that you were doing pretty consistently. If you decide to use AI tools in your research, we cannot stress all this enough. Please always double check with your professor or your syllabi first to see if they even allow the use of AI tools. You don't want to go against those rules if it's not allowed. Always double check those sources. Again, it is infamous for providing fictitious information all the time, or even providing those fictitious citations. So make sure they exist. Make sure that information is factual. Use your critical thinking skills to evaluate those results. So we know we could see there are lots of biases and stereotypes, especially in those images. So just use your critical thinking skills that you've come across to just determine if these are proper to use. And be transparent. Again, if your instructor and syllabi allow it, if your school allows it, be transparent about it. You don't want to get, dinged for something that that you could have provided that proper attribution to. And never rely on AI for your actual research. Again, many of these tools are not connected to the internet. It is not a substitute for actual research, whether it's Google Scholar or your libraries, etc. But it can be helpful to use to brainstorm. So again, we'll provide you the link to these slides. Actually, I'll have the link right here. And just refer back to these steps. So if it's good to go, then just look back at all these steps and make sure that it can be used within your own research. I didn't realize I had talked so quickly. So if you have any questions or topics you would like to explore further regarding AI, you can feel free to, again, use this Slido. Or please put it in the chat, raise your hand. We are available and more than happy to answer any questions that we can. I guess I was just so excited to talk about it. I talked a little faster than I thought I would.
I felt it was a good speed. Does anybody
I'll let people
question?
kind of ruminate their thoughts and get some questions
It's a
put
lot to
together.
process.
But it is, and I think it's also fascinating to see how fast this has come along, right? So what ChatGPT really kind of hit the mark in, what was it, October, November of 22. And already there's a new version of ChatGPT yet again coming out, I think later this month or maybe early next month. I guess one of the questions that I would have, we get a lot of our office, the Office of Academic Integrity, receives a lot of reports from faculty alleging the use of AI. And one of the things that we work with them on is to kind of help us understand and explore what are the concepts or what are the concerns, what are the areas of concern in the submission that leads one to think that AI may have been used. From a different lens, I'm assuming that you all have students coming forth and are asking for information about how to excuse me, how to create a paper, how to do research. What are some of the themes, if anything, that you've seen regarding the use of AI? Have you had students, for example, coming to you and saying, I want to use AI, how do I use it ethically, or even asking, can I use it? Those kinds of things. Are you receiving that kind of inquiry? And what's your typical response? How do you assist students in being able to navigate these waters?
You can go ahead, Mikhail.
No, you go ahead. It's fine.
You know what? Let me go ahead and stop sharing, and we can maybe just have a discussion rather than staring at a blank screen. But yeah, I have quite a few students come up to me, and I try not to bring it up first, especially when they're stuck on research, because that's not, I don't want to tell them, hey, go to this tool. But I definitely always, if they bring it up, like, what have you done? What's your process for your research? I have many students tell me that they actually use it to come up with those search terms. And this is particularly so, especially with the doctoral students when they're researching this topic that is very new, very specific, and there's not a whole lot of information that they can find in traditional ways. So, but that is the number one way that I've been seeing it used is those key terms. I haven't seen it so much brought forth, as a brainstorming ideas. I think a lot of the students, I think I work with at least, are already have an idea of what they want to research while their time here. Um, but I have seen it used to outline like a paper, especially when they have an idea and it's like jumbled and their thoughts keep going back and forth. It really has helped them organize those thoughts in a thoughtful manner. But what have you seen, Michaela?
I haven't, I have to say, like the classes that I work with mostly, they didn't allow the use of AI. So it was, fairly clear that there was not a thing in those classes. But at the same time, I have to say, like my approach is to be proactive about it, to be, I think that we in the libraries, we don't want to go ahead and say like, oh, you cannot use this, or, don't try it. But like you said, like we want to make sure that if AI is being used, it's being used correctly and ethically. So being proactive about educating students about how to use it and how to make sure that they attribute it correctly is my approach. And I mean, again, like I play with it too in my work, and there's areas of my work where it's absolutely okay to use it. And then there's areas, for my own research where it's not okay to just go by what AI says. So it depends, and I try to relate that to the students. But yeah, I think so far from what I've seen, the students in the classes have been like either they weren't like allowed to use it, or they were really good about, they were very hesitant actually to use it because they were scared of doing it wrong, or not doing it in an ethical way. And then also to what you said, Jack, I also thought like I'm not a native speaker, so I played with Chat GPT and wanted to see if it, like with a tracker. And because I'm not a native speaker, it would accuse me of having used generative AI because my grammar, my structure is not 100%. So I think that can be a very slippery slope to, if people put something that a student wrote into a tracker, and then the tracker says like it was written by ChatGPT. Maybe that person just wasn't a native speaker, or maybe that tracker isn't working accurately. So I feel that it's a very tricky situation as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that detection, there's no tool that has yet been made that can accurately, reliably identify the use of AI. So one of the things that we are constantly looking at is the actual material that's submitted, and looking at saying like what are some elements. I mean, there's obviously some telltale signs. There's some that are more obvious than others, especially if one includes the prompt that comes back from ChatGPT, such as like here are some examples of what I would consider. We had one submission that included I am an AI bot, so I therefore don't have feelings, but things of that nature. That's a telltale sign. Um, but generally speaking, you're absolutely right, Michaela. The detection software tools that are available now, and I think it's always going to be catch up. As the new versions of ChatGPT or Claude or Bard or whatever other product that's out there, as they enhance the detection software, then also has to catch up to identify that more accurately. Um, I also just want to comment and say thank you. Oh, let me hold on to that. I see that there's a hand up. Sarah, what question do you have?
Hi, yeah, I came a little late, so I'm sorry, but I looked at the slides and I was reading over the attribution. So I guess I had a question on this. Is it like, is this best practice is to cite it as like the end of an assignment, like this in this APA MLA format, or is it best to integrate it into your work? So like I'm a grad student, and like my professor like said to attribute ChatGPT within the work of I brainstormed these ideas with the help of ChatGPT. So yeah, I just wondered like what is your perspective on like best practice there?
Go ahead, Michaela.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, if your professor says to integrate it, I mean, it's, then I would go with that. And like again, the LibGuide provides the citation information that you could use for that. I think it's also, I think Clarissa mentioned that before. It's very good practice. Not every professor necessarily requires it, but to also add an appendix if it's really extensive use of AI. I would probably also add an appendix that shows the prompt or has screenshots of the prompt and whatnot to be really transparent of how you used ChatGPT or generative AI. I always say it's better to over attribute than to under attribute. So better, be completely transparent rather than, trying to muddle or like to not show something. So yeah, better do more than less.
One thing that might be helpful too, especially if it's just brainstorming the idea. I would, of course, talk to your instructor about this, but maybe even just a footnote if it's not going to be an actual in-text citation, just so that way you can notate someplace that this was generated with the help of, and then maybe even adding that supplemental page to show how it helped brainstorm what your actual question was and what the outcome was for that.
Yeah, these are really great ideas. I I also work in like the sciences, so I'm wondering like how does this apply for like non-research paper based? I know like this topic was like research papers, but for assignments, just normal assignments where you don't have like footnotes or appendices or bibliography. How do you still attribute um, that some of the work was done by AI when the work that you're turning in doesn't require you to list like sources?
I think that's a really great question. Again, I would maybe initiate some of those footnotes, especially if you're not adding all those supplemental pages at the end. At least it's in there.
Yeah, or maybe add a paragraph at the beginning explaining the process, outlining the process of how you went about it and how you used generative AI.
Yeah, that's a really good point too.
Yeah,
Again,
I don't.
go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just
Sorry.
saying, like we see how how we're still at the beginning of this, and how for many AI tools we don't necessarily have like an answer for everything yet.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I'm going to lean on Clarissa and Michaela to make sure and fact check me on this. But one of the ways that I like to kind of, I'm hearing a little bit of it about the apprehension, and this is really relatively normal, especially for such a new technology. Like, how do I make sure that I am engaging in conduct that is not outside of what the norm or the expectations are, either presented by my professor or if you're looking to get published by the publisher, et cetera. One of the things that I like to kind of hone in on is what the purpose of attribution, what's the why behind it. And I think that what I like to reflect on is that we're attributing work to where the information, the ideas, the words, etc., came from, so that the reader is not misinformed as to what is your own original thought versus that of another's. And I'll use another's broadly to incorporate generative AI into the conversation. So, um, for the purposes of an assignment, it's always best to go to the instructor and to see what their specific asks and requirements are. But recognize that just because you get an answer from one professor, that's not necessarily going to be the same for another, or for if you're looking outside of academia, for what their expectations are. So to what I think Clarissa and Michaela also said was, it's better to um, uh, uh, give give credit to the authors No one's ever going to come back to you and say, wow, you gave too much credit. But the opposite could have some pretty stark consequences. You know, and I was just looking at ChatGPT. I think, Clarissa, you'd mentioned earlier about taking a screenshot, and I think this is, at least to me, a relatively new feature. Is you can actually save or share a link to the chat, so you can see if you've got multiple, you know, if you're interacting with ChatGPT and asking it to revise or come back with multiple asks. It will save that whole chat, and you can copy that, save it as a PDF, and add that as an appendix to a paper relatively easy. So even the technology is doing what it can to help make it easier for us to cite the source. So it's kind of a nice little add and feature.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that. I just opened it up again. That's pretty cool. So yeah, that'll make things a lot easier than screenshotting a bunch of different areas, especially if it's a long ask. Thanks for that.
Also, just as an advice, I mean, obviously, like librarians also don't know all the answers to how to, you know, come up with attribution citations, but we can help help you find out about it. So I mean, it's completely normal, I think, to be stuck, since we are still so much at the beginning and there's still more questions than answers. So we're always here to help and to help students navigate this together. So they can always reach out to the subject librarian or to anybody in the library's chat or via email or in person. And although we may not have the immediate answer, we will, you know, work through it together with you to get to a better point.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That was really helpful.
I'm doing that 7-second count on Zoom, but seeing that there are, at least as of now, until someone tells me otherwise, no additional questions. I think at this point, I'd just like to really thank our presenters, Michaela and Clarissa, for a wonderful presentation, a timely presentation. This has been a great session, and I think that, you know, it just goes to demonstrate that we are learning as we go as well, that we're trying to figure this out, and that, like you said, there's a plethora of resources here to assist. We may not have all the answers, but we will work collaboratively to try to find them. My hope is that Academic Integrity Week and AI Week can become go back to the moniker and not be confused with artificial intelligence in the near future. We have to specifically carve out Academic Integrity Week, because I think too many people think we're just talking about AI and there's so much more to it. But this is a great conversation, and one that is absolutely necessary for all of us. So thank you so much for putting the effort together and creating this great presentation.